Another thing we talked about yesterday is how local history does not get taught in schools,
Yeah.
and what a shame that is.
Yeah.
And I get it. It's kind of you've got to educate the children of the nation, and there needs to be a fairly consistent method to do that. I do understand that, but what a shame that we don't talk through, the the greatness of what we were and the ugliness of what we were, and to understand all that. I think it's so important to really dig into history, to learn it, and learn mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so grateful for this conversation and for your
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. Four years ago, I bought a new truck for the first time ever, and I was so excited. It was incredible. It smelled good. It felt good. I wasn't constantly afraid of breaking down, It was awesome. But after I drove it for a couple weeks, I do the same thing that I always do, and the back seat it started to fill up with stuff. I'm guiding elk hunters and deer hunters, and I'm duck hunting, and I'm fly fishing, and all that gear just accumulates. And pretty soon, I wasn't able to take people with me anymore, and I was embarrassed. People would ask for a ride, and like, nah, sorry, man, I've got too much stuff with me. But I couldn't put it in the bed because then it gets damaged by weather. So I go to the internet, and I'm looking for options, and I ended up buying a deck-to-drawer system. Now, this was a big purchase for me, but it's something that I felt like I needed, and it looked like it was going to be a good product, and it really was. Decked came out with a new drawer system this year, and they've made some meaningful improvements over the previous one. You have almost no wasted space in your truck bed now, so you can access the sides of the drawers, and then the drawers roll a full 18 inches farther out, so you can actually access the back of the drawer even if you don't have a lot of arm reach. There's some really strong tie-down points on top. They have a 400-pound load rating, so if you're going to haul something like a motorcycle or big coolers or whatever, you can really strap your gear down and make it secure. You can lock these drawer systems, so you can lock the drawers, or if your tailgate locks, then nobody can access the drawers anyways. So I actually feel like my stuff is more secure inside this drawer system than in the cab of my truck. That's a big deal to me. The complete deck system is made in America by Americans, and that's something that I love and appreciate. They've got one that will fit in any truck or van that's been made in America in the last 20 years plus. You can go to decked.com/sixranch and get free shipping. But just being honest with you, they get free shipping to everybody. I also, while you're there, want you to check out their deco line. So they've got a bunch of different boxes and storage containers that either fit on top of or inside of the drawer system, and those are built really robust. I saw the prototypes at an event this summer. I'm impressed. I'm excited to get my hands on them. I haven't yet, but the prototypes were super badass, and the ones that are in production model, they're available now over at decked.com. So even if you just need a place for some tools, or you need a new bow case, or something along those lines, go check that out. And if you're driving around right now and your back seat is just full of gear and you can't haul people around, maybe you should consider looking at the full deck drawer system, because it's a good piece of gear. It was a good purchase for me, and I hope it helps you. In the United States, there are about 15.2 million hunters. That's how many hunting licenses we sell in the country. And they spend around $21 billion per year, which breaks down to an average of $2,800 per hunter. Now, we need to be really smart about how we spend that money. You can't spend it on stuff that's going to break. Otherwise, you have to buy something else again, and you end up costing yourself even more. We also need to be smart about how much weight we carry in our packs, because that's a serious limiting factor. One way to remove about 5 pounds out of your pack without sacrificing your ability to find animals is to get rid of your spotting scope and tripod. Now, there's a time and a place for those things, and I carry both of them a lot. But if I need to go lightweight, I'm going to carry stabilized binoculars. And the best stabilized binoculars I have ever used are from Sig Sauer. They are the Zulu 6, and they just came out with a new pair called the Zulu 6 HDX. I use the 12 power magnification model. They weigh 21.5 ounces. And they have two modes of stabilization. So you throw the lever forward once, and that's going to stabilize the image. If you turn it off and turn it back on again, that's going to stabilize it even more. And I'm not kidding. It is more stable than if you're glassing from a tripod. It is absolutely incredible. You're going to be able to see stuff at just incredible distances and really break it down. Like, you're going to be able to tell the difference between a Billy and a Nanny mountain goat at a mile. You're going to be able to actually see if there's a kicker coming off that 4x4 muley that just popped up over the hill. They work great at early and last light. They work great at highlight. They fit really well in my hands. Like, this was one of the first products that I asked Sig to make when I started working with them. And to no surprise, they were already on it. They were way ahead of me. But this is a really good piece of gear. I highly encourage you look into it. You can go to sigsauer.com, look for the Zulu 6 HDX. Comes in a few different magnification settings, but the one that I like the best is the 12 power. Check it out. I feel like I've done a good job about not talking about hunting so far, but you brought it up, so here we go. I have never found an arrowhead in the valley.
Yeah.
I don't know of any arrowheads found in the valley.
Yeah.
Do you?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Just as an example, the other day, I'd been given a presentation on one of the pioneer women who, your family's tied in through, Fanny Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so, of course, a direct line to you and your family. She's a very interesting woman. And I just went to Bramlett Cemetery to take a picture of her gravestone to be part of the presentation. And I was like, this would be a great site for an Indian camp right here. And I just started wandering around the edges of the cemetery, where just outside the fence, cattle and horses grazing up around there. And so there's bare ground, and looking around, like, oh, there's a chip, there's a flake. Oh, wow. Oh, there's a grinding stone. Yeah. Oh, there's an arrowhead. I mean, so, I in the valley, it's harder to, most of it's private ground.
Yeah.
And most of it's got good ground cover on it.
Right.
So it's harder to see them.
For sure.
But 100%, like when they plow the field there at the confluence, I, as a kid, wandering down there, picked up arrowheads, and then you go down the lower valley around where the warm springs are there towards the mouth of the canyon, big campsites there. And if you, I used to fish those creeks, and so, trespassing basically. But I think they'd see a kid fishing, and they would, and right. I'd pick up arrowheads along the stream, the little dry creek, rock creek, and yeah. So they're here, just harder to see.
Harder to see.
And no archaeology's been done.
Right.
Because most folks, understandably, are not that thrilled with the idea of someone finding a native site on their property. Makes them a little nervous.
Yeah, and with good reason.
With good reason, yeah. It makes them nervous. Yeah.
When we did this big juniper removal project, there's a tree just off the hill here that they said, well, we don't know that this was a burial tree, but it looks like it could be, so we have to leave this one.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
That's fine. That's cool. But what can also happen is you end up with a sensitive site that now you can no longer access in the way that you used to for, how you conduct business with your agriculture. And things like that can really stack up against a ranch in a really negative way. So there is a fear around that.
Oh, for sure. I know one of the ranchers, I won't mention the name, but I was talking to them that when they did the township surveys in 1867, they noted Nez Perce trails, one of them coming through the valley. And I was talking to one of the local ranchers, like, hey, would mind, let's walk over there and just see if we can see any sign at all that that trail might have been there. And it was also claimed in their notes, that that was a campsite. And it was like, we could probably wander around there and see. Of course, the rancher was like nervous,
Yeah.
wanted to look and wanted
Yeah.
to do it, but also wanted that kept on the down low. And of course, like you're saying, understandable. Yeah.
We have something interesting on the salmon that, as far as archaeology, which is the dig site at Graves Creek, and they found evidence of humans being there as far back as 16,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And then they stopped the project. So maybe if they went deeper, they would have found more, maybe not. Do we think that the Nez Perce are connected with those people who are pre-Clovis?
Yeah, I mean, boy, that's interesting stuff like that. Cooper's Ferry site, on the salmon, talking about, I think they bumped it up to 16.6, 16.8, somewhere
Really?
in there. So those, what they're finding in that very, very earliest, oldest, it's pre-Clovis, it's pre-Folsom. These are these stem points, which are a different technology than Clovis and
they trace
Folsom.
back to Japan.
Right. They can say that, like, oh, the Japanese islands, these are the closest analogy to that tool manufacturing technology. The closest match is, out of Japan. So, that's curious.
Yeah.
And the land, there was nobody at that time frame. There wasn't an opening in the glaciers.
No.
And the sea was 50 feet lower. And so any evidence that we might have is out there in the ocean of that migration. And I think Rimrock Shelter and where's that, Harney County down that way, it's pushing those same sort of dates early. It's pre-Clovis, pre-Folsom.
Yeah. I'm a boat guy. I like boats. And I think boats are one of the biggest and most important parts of human migration technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is the most efficient way to travel with weight is by boat. It continues to be. So it makes a lot of sense to me that, before the Ice Age ended, whether that was Younger Dryas or something else, we have people coming out of Japan on boats, following the shelf ice across. So they've still got access to fresh water, even if they have to melt it. There's going to be lots of wildlife along that shelf.
Oh, yeah.
There's going to be places that they can pull off and camp on ground, maybe even stay for periods of time. I'm sure that there was encampments of people who are nomadic, but had established sites there, whether they're building those out of whale bones or driftwood or who knows what. But it's very conceivable to me that you could take a people from Japan across that shelf and down the Pacific coast, and then up these major rivers like the Fraser and the Columbia. But for somebody to come across from Japan, come up the Columbia, up the Snake, up the Salmon to Graves Creek, and have done so in an amount of time where the tool manufacturing technology is still traceable and linear back to Japan, means that it happened relatively quickly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the technology would have adapted really quickly as well.
Yeah.
That's just incredible to me.
Yeah.
Incredibly fascinating. So if you think about that more, then you would have had people that have been settled here for, 5,000 or 6,000 years before these Clovis people start to come down that cross Beringia. Yeah. And what kind of conflict would have occurred there? It must have been incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, and we really don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we really don't know. So I think there's a lot of stuff still going on. I mean, it's really interesting and exciting because a lot of those older theories, how it all went down is being changed.
Yeah.
And, people have to go back to the drawing board and look at that. Like you said now, I mean, I think the more accepted thing is the Kelp Highway, like you're describing, along that coast, whether they're doing it partially in boats or whether they're just hugging the shoreline, But it's clear that they came that way and they went clear up these river valleys. Like you think about, that's a long ways from the coast up the Columbia, make a couple turns and find yourself up the Salmon, up there. There's a few twists and turns along the way, but
yeah, I mean, that's close to 700 river miles.
Yeah, that's a long ways.
Uphill miles.
Yeah. Yeah. And the span of 16,000 years starts to get a little wacky, at least in my head, because it's just hard to conceive of that kind of time frame. I mean, like I look at my own family, like, oh, they've been here since 1878 or whatever. That's a long time, but in the scheme of things, nah, it's just a drop in the bucket. And so over that, you know, if you're looking from a Nez Perce perspective, and they're saying we've been here forever, we've always been here, and you're trying to, but 16,000 years is forever.
No.
And the changes that occur over that time are, epic.
Right. And, we've got 22,000-year-old tracks in the White Sands in New Mexico.
That's wild.
We've got big question marks hanging over South America and these civilizations that were pretty advanced down there. We're finding out more and more about them. So it's very possible that these people that were here 16,000 years ago were not the first people there at all either.
Yeah.
Another thing that's interesting to me, as far as species migration, we know that horses and camels evolved in North America first. The horse that the Nez Perce used was the Appaloosa, which the Appaloosas of today are, by and large, one of my least favorite types of horses. I think that the old ones were probably really great, and then we bred them for the spots on their butt for too long, and now I don't like them too much anymore. But there's still some good ones out there. Now, there's been some direct genetic matches between the Appaloosas here and some horses in Mongolia that look like Appaloosas. And it makes me wonder if we didn't still have horses here. Like if there weren't.
I didn't know that piece. That's curious.
If there weren't some Appies that were here that never left. If there weren't horses already in North America before the Spaniards.
Yeah. Yeah. I would like to know more about all of that. There's a couple accounts of, particularly on the McFarland side out of the Nez Perce tribe, about talking about that Appaloosas and, they're breeding for more spotty horses, but I just don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
That's really interesting stuff.
Okay, so hunting. What was the order of precedence as far as species that were important to hunt? Was it deer? Was it elk? Was it bighorns? Was it bears? As far as what we had here?
As far as the Nez Perce side, or I mean, like you can look at an account like, Henry Spalding packing up and leaving Lapaway with old Joseph to come into the valley. That's his first Spalding's trip into the valley. And, day by day, he's writing in his diary what they killed. And so what you see is like, holy smoke, a lot of bighorn sheep.
Yeah.
As they make their way. And, the settlers, you also read the settler accounts that they're like, bighorn sheep is tasty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they preferred it and liked it. But you'll see that if I'm going to get this probably wrong, but to my memory, mostly on that trip back and forth was bighorn sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And then deer and elk, of course. And if I remember, a wolf, like they shot, killed, and ate a wolf. And I was like, that's interesting. But the main push of the trip up here was to process salmon. So they were coming up to the lake and the river to get a good supply of, winter salmon.
I know some of the Nez Perce along the Columbia teased Lewis and Clark for wanting to eat dogs.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that they're eating a wolf over here, but they're giving them a hard time about wanting to eat dogs.
I better check my source on that. It's been a minute since I've read that account, but it's sticking out of my head that I think they did eat and kill a wolf, but when
we did the show with Jim Akinson about what he experienced in the Frank, they only found elk remains at one of those sites. It was almost all bighorns.
Yeah. And I've talked to other folks, Bruce, if you talk to Bruce Womack, the former archaeologist here on the Forest Service, that's one thing he'll say is that, you don't find a lot of elk.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have accounts of Nez Perce elk hunts in, between here and the Grand Round Valley. So no doubt about they were hunting elk.
Do you think they use dogs to hunt?
I don't know. I've never seen an account of that, but they definitely had dogs, and I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't put him to work somewhere or another in that regard.
I would have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would think.
Yeah.
But of course, you get out, you've probably seen some of them, and you get out and you can see these drives that they've built, there's not a whole lot sometimes, just a little rock thing here just to herd them just through this pinch point where they're waiting, deer drives or maybe elk, I don't know, probably deer drives.
Sheep for sure.
Sheep for sure, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's where I find most of the arrowheads is in mountain passes where it'd be really easy to funnel animals through.
Yep.
And I think that there was probably a couple dudes hiding in a blind with all the arrows that they could build and fling it at everything that came running through.
Yep.
But that's where I really have the question about dogs. It's not so much like the pushing or the gathering of animals for hunting, but tracking wounded animals.
Yeah.
Because archery inherently wounds a lot of animals.
Yep.
And archery and I don't care how good of a shot you are, if you're using a little stone point that's susceptible to breaking, you're going to wound a bunch of animals.
Oh, for sure.
Especially if you're doing it in this situation where they're moving as they're coming through. So I would imagine that they use dogs to track and maybe even to help them take down and kill animals that were already wounded.
Yep. I don't know that right offhand that I can think of an account where that I've seen that, but like you said, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they weren't.
What do you know about their buffalo trips to Montana? This is another one that's interesting to me.
Yeah, it was super important to them.
Mm-hmm.
For the hides and the meat, and those were big deals to them. And I do know that, of course, the Indian agents on the Lapaway were constantly trying to stop that.
Really?
Because they wanted them to stay home and tend to the farm and not be, and they would roll out and be gone for 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah.
Because that's a long trip.
Sure.
And so by the time they went over there and, they'd end up spending a couple of years gone.
They were so wealthy in protein here between the deer elk, the bighorns, the bears, the salmon.
Oh.
They didn't want for meat, I can't imagine, very often. So, I like to think that those bison trips were as much about just taking a trip and maybe getting some fresh genetics for your tribe as it was about anything else.
Oh, I think you're right.
It doesn't make sense to ride to Great Falls and come back with a bag of jerky.
Yeah, and it's so much in their culture was wrapped up in, that idea. I mean, if you're talking about a warrior culture and, you're also going to go fight enemies for your holding on to your hunting grounds, right? So there's a lot of prestige wrapped up in warrior culture and stories told around the campfire, these people that are respected in warriors in this culture, as a young person, you would also aspire to get a shot at that, right?
Yeah.
And so, because that was one of the things that would elevate you is your courage.
Right.
And so you don't get a chance to show that unless you got an enemy. Of course, they did. They always had to keep an eye on their own boundaries from, what's loosely been called the snakes, the Bannock, Shoshone, and Paiute, that sort of folks that would be pushing up against their boundaries and, say, over across the mountains in Eagle Valley and over that way. But so I think, like you're saying, it was a lot of things, like a chance to go over to Montana, because I always want to see what's over the next hill, and to go hunt buffalo, which is a whole different kind of thing, and takes a little bit of courage if you're hunting buffalo on horses, different from elk, different from bighorn. This is a little more fearsome beast that you got to contend with.
Not only that, but wherever there's buffalo, there's something that wants to eat a buffalo.
Yep.
And you're going to have
Grizzlies.
lots of opportunity for conflict, not only with other animals, but with other tribes.
People. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think that's 100% in there. You can see in settler accounts, again, of mostly these farm boys that are just like dying for a chance to get off the farm.
Sure.
And you'll see them writing about really wanting these daydreams about wanting to be an Indian. They don't come out and say that, but the life of the freedom of a life where they would also denigrate that idea that all they do is they go around and hunt and fish. That's all they do, and they make the women do all the work. So they would be longing for that life because of the freedom of it. Because if you think about a hard-nosed dad on the farm, and traditionally, you had to hang on the farm till you're 18 or so, till you were allowed to go out and make your own way, because you had to pay your dues to the family. And that, just the daily grind of working on a farm, as opposed to imagining yourself jumping on a spotted pony, heading to Montana with the gang to go buffalo, and you're just weighing it out. You can see which one was more attractive. That lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like James W. McAllister, he's slugging it out on the farm. 100%. It's like, man, I kind of want to go shoot a bear and cook some trout and the fat, This is what I'm more interested in.
Yeah, and you think about the Nez Perce, like you were talking about how they're rich in protein, but if you look at the geography and the topography and the environment of this county, it's basically a perfect setup. I mean, you have these streams that are just bringing different seasonal runs of big seasonal runs of fish. But not only that, it's set up so nicely where you've got these high alpine mountains, and then just a stone's throw away, you've got these deep canyons, which is perfect place to hang out in the winter. Nobody's going to have to make hay bales in this system,
right? Because
you're moving your cattle and your horses seasonally, and then they can graze down there. And it didn't take long for the settlers to figure out oh, wait a minute. We can also drive them down into the canyon where there's open range and where horses and cattle can get to that feed, where up in the valley you're contending with snow. So that system, I think, for me personally, who's a person who likes to wander, where you're moving from place to place in a year and you're seeing not only different landscape, but different environment, pretty much, week by week by week by week, not a bad way to live.
Yeah. So following that, what did hunting look like for the settlers?
I think, of course, as Oregon's game laws developed, there was those time periods where there was no game law, and a lot of those folks, were hitting the game pretty hard, which resulted, in 1912 they had to reimport the elk, and then even into the 20s, you can see in our local papers where seeing a deer out in the field was newsworthy, like front page headline news. So as all those folks were settling out, whether it's the Promise country north of the valley, so the valley got settled up pretty well, and then these Imnaha and these other further flung areas started, settling. There was more intense pressure on the game just to feed your family. But there was also folks, you got accounts where, so-and-so and so-and-so are bringing 4,000 deer hides out of the Imnaha to take over to Wallowa for, to be tanned.
So there were some big market hunting efforts going on.
And besides that, for the road building or the railroad building or logging camps, all that sort of stuff, there are people that were just making their money strictly off of supplying those camps with game. Yeah. And like in Enterprise, even till late, you could roll into the butcher shop and buy bear meat, or buy elk meat. You know what I mean? And so there were people doing it just strictly to feed their family for subsistence, and there were folks that were doing it to make a profit and making a living off of it.
We have a clipping of the hunting regulations in Oregon from 1903.
1903.
Yeah. And I can find it if I dig around on my phone for long enough, but moose is on there.
Yeah.
There were no limits on bighorn, but there were a season. Pheasant was on there already. Yeah. So Oregon was the first state that had pheasants. And I think they might have had limits for grouse and some various things, but really interesting. I've read quotes from ODFW that whitetail were abundant prior to 1890. But were basically extinct until restocking efforts on the Washington side of the Wanaha, and now we have more whitetail than mule deer, and mule deer are crashing. My sense, is that I've not been able to find evidence of there being whitetail here in the past. Have you?
No, but when the settlers mention, they just say deer,
deer.
you don't really know, or they talk, what was here? I
Mm.
don't know. And I think I'm trying to think of the few archaeological digs like Lightning Creek and others, whether my memory is that it's mule deer, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't found any evidence to substantiate that, but I believe that whitetail are a non-native species here.
Yeah.
And if anybody has evidence that shows that they were here at all prior to 1890, I'd be fascinated to see it.
Yeah.
But I think that that's a pretty bold claim to make without showing your homework.
Yeah. I do too. I've never seen it if it's there, but
They made distinctions on coyotes and wolves, even though those species weren't that different at the time. The wolves were only about twice the size of the coyotes at that time. And I've seen some of the bounty descriptions where they called wolves Montana coyotes.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting.
It is, and that gets into a whole sort of curious, because a lot of times in the settler accounts, if they say wolves, sometimes they're talking about coyotes.
Right.
And so you never can quite suss out, like Findley's have an account of trying to kill wolves.
Mm-hmm.
And, with talking with Vic Hoggins and other folks, kind of reading and, his thoughts on all that, why weren't there more wolves here? Or were there more wolves here? And so again, and even in the Willamette Valley, if they're talking wolves, sometimes they'll be talking coyotes, and sometimes they'll be talking wolves. So you're not ever totally clear what's going on there.
Were the elk extinct or extirpated prior to reintroduction in 1912, or were they just diminished?
I think according to Vic,
Yeah.
and looking at some of the genetic studies, that there were definitely pockets in the Minam and there were definitely pockets in the Winaha that had held on. And at least in his opinion, I think the work that they've done shows that there weren't many, but in these little holdout hidey holes that there were a few around. But you can definitely, in the newspaper accounts as time goes on, you can just see they're not mentioned.
Yeah.
Early on, you'll see so-and-so killed 37 elk at the head of the canyon, and but as time goes on, you don't see it. And so they'd put the herd on them, I think, pretty hard. But my guess is, and Vic's opinion is that, there were some holding out and hiding out.
Our human population in the county is largely the same as it was in 1900. Kind of take me through the 20th century and what happened in Wallowa County. Is that when we started getting some of those early photographs?
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that we don't have more photographs, as the technology changed on that photography, those early glass negatives, especially the wet ones, where you basically had that process pretty tricky,
Mm-hmm.
Packing the plates in and all of that. So our earliest photographs really would be middle 1880s.
Okay.
And then as surprisingly as they got flexible film and started moving that direction, then we start to see more, but really doesn't take off till about 1900.
Okay.
And then we start to see a lot more with the little Brownie Kodak cameras. So anybody basically could pick one of those up and take some photographs. But
is it Hiram Mary?
yeah.
I love those photographs.
Great photographer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
It's almost amazing to me that you could have like somebody like him. He feels impossible to me that you could have a great photographer in this area under these conditions at a time where how do you even compare one photograph to the next one? There's so few out there. Like, how do you even develop yourself as a great photographer? And in a way that endures to this day.
Yeah.
Those are great photographs.
Oh, they are. Yeah. And I mean, he's just an interesting character all the way around. I mean, came out of South or North Dakota or Minnesota. Well, I'll get that wrong, but he was basically homesteading by himself, and a lot of that stuff, of course, that most of his place burned up in the Grizzly Fire, whatever year that was. But recording basically the whole history of the time he was there, and I think he moved there in 1897 and started homesteading on grouse there, just on the far side, north side of the river. And never married, and was the community photographer for everybody, and documented that whole thing and took some incredible photographs.
Yeah.
I mean, really,
Do you have
just
a
the
favorite?
detail of them is astounding. The quality
Yeah.
of them is, yeah.
Do you have a favorite?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's one of him that has gone miss. I mean, we've got a copy of it, but it's not a very good copy. It was basically some folks had taken a Xerox copy out to Orvis Moore's place and made a Xerox copy of the photograph. And where the originals went, haven't seen it, but it's basically Hiram Mary. He's standing in his yard. He's holding an old barn cat, and his pants have been patched so many times, and he's taken the photograph by pulling a wire, so it's a self-portrait, and it's just this really cool photograph of him with that barn cat. But my other favorite is probably and maybe you've seen it around, is of William Russell. William was a settler out there too. William Russell had killed a man over out of Dayton. He felt like either the man he killed was, trying to get with his wife. So he killed him. He ended up going to Steilacoom, the territorial prison in Washington, and then Washington Territory. And then when they were building the Wallowa prison, they sent him down there, and he was in there for 13 years. But when he got out, his brother had settled in Troy, so he went up to Troy. But by the time Hiram Mary's taking a picture of him, he's this old man, got a big beard. And in this portrait that Mary takes of him, he's got his boots wrapped with burlap and just twine, and the snow's pretty deep, and he's got his cattle dog with him, and then he's holding his gun in this picture, and a big grizzled beard, and just a really great photograph.
And the depth in his eyes.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
That one with the ladies grouse hunting.
Yeah, I love that one. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, I love that
So
one.
good.
Yeah.
Just
They've got
dressed to the
dresses,
nines.
hats.
Looks like they're about to go to the Kentucky Derby or something.
Yeah.
And they've got just whatever guns are lying around. Killed a couple grouse.
Right.
I love it.
I do too. It'd be super annoying to me to hunt grouse in those dresses. You're just like, that seems like, that's funny. But,
it makes me wonder if they didn't, like kill the grouse wearing whatever they were wearing and then get dressed up for the picture.
They might have. Yeah. It's pretty fancy grouse hunting gear, if you ask me.
But hilarious. Or, just shot them on the way back from church or, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, we kind of saw mining come and go a couple times. We really saw like a steady rise in timber for 90 years.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about splash dam logging.
Yeah.
I think that's something that most of the world doesn't know about.
Yeah. That's wild stuff, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, all of that, was really 1908 and beyond, because, to get that lumber out of here in any kind of commercially viable way, you got to have the railroad. Because, but like you're talking about those, and I'm sure you've been up and looked at what's left of the old splash. Well, there's a number of them, but the one just beyond, upriver from Red's Horse Ranch there, looking at that and then looking at the photographs. Because, of course, John Scovlin did quite a bit of good research on that Minam area and how exactly that worked. And then looking at the photographs, it's pretty mind-bending. Man, they were tearing that river up when they were doing that. And I think if I remember right, it was about a 5, if you're talking driving logs from around Red's Horse Ranch down to Minam, to Minam, current day Minam, was about a 5 river charge process.
Well, there's people that are going to be listening to this in Kenya. So kind of paint the picture of what this is.
Yeah. So you've got this roadless area up this wild river canyon with big old growth timber, a mix of ponderosa and fir and tamarack. And so the loggers were going up there in these logging camps, and again supplied by folks both their own supplies, but they had hunters in the camps go out and kill deer and elk and whatever to help feed the camp.
Beats cutting trees.
Yeah, and these guys, I mean, if you think about what they're doing, I mean, this is a lot of this will burn some calories in terms of cutting these big trees
with crosscuts and axes.
Yeah, exactly. And so the system that they developed to get those logs out of there, because it was roadless and they didn't have railroad, was to build these splash dams, back the water up, cut the trees, and then get them down to the river's edge, get them into the water, and then release the water behind the splash dam. And of course, they'd have whole crews trying to keep that straight and herd the logs down wherever they got hung up, which was a dangerous business in itself.
Oh, man.
And so once that initial charge had went through, they could get the logs so far, then they'd have to let the water fill back up behind the splash dam, give it another charge, and keep driving them down the river that way until they had got them down to Mineham at that time had a couple of mills and like 6 taverns, 6 saloons in town. So it's a pretty busy place.
And milling that lumber would have been no treat either. A few years ago, we had tremendously high water, and the number of logs that came, down the Salmon River and down Hell's Canyon was remarkable. And I was rafting on it on part of that time, and there was a log about every 8 seconds coming down river.
Yeah.
And by the time they hit Asotin and Lewiston, it was solid logs all the way across the river. It looked like you could walk from Idaho to Washington on the logs. And a bunch of guys were piking those logs out of there to get free lumber to mill. And they found really quickly that every little crack in those logs was full of sand.
Yeah.
And they couldn't mill it. It would eat through their saw blades almost immediately.
Yeah.
I'm sure this was a problem with the splash dam logging as well. So they must have had milling techniques that were able to defeat all the sand and rocks and stuff that would have been in those logs.
I'm sure you're got to be 100% right, because when you release all that water, there is all kinds of sediment and sand and grit. It's like I've always marveled, like that specialist skill of sharpening saw blades is a whole thing.
Yeah.
And if you've ever dabbled around in your own chainsaw sharpening, it's a skill set.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I'm sure that was a big part of it, because it had to be, like you say, they had to be loaded with
Did
sand.
they send any of them all the way to Lewiston?
There is a couple of accounts, that they actually did that. Actually, some really early accounts that when they were building a railroad over between Walla Walla and then pushing the railroad up towards Lewiston, that early, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it was 74, where guys driving from the Wallowa River Canyon, driving logs, loses his life doing it, driving them all that way to fulfill contracts for those railroads that they were building further way downriver. So that's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
I don't even know how you do it. He must have had a crew.
Sure.
I don't even know. That's a long ways to,
Yeah.
be trying to herd a bunch of logs down there,
There's some significant whitewater too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And all kinds of places to get stuff hung up and,
Yeah.
So
wild. And probably, walking on top of those logs downriver for a lot of that.
Yeah.
The balance.
Yeah.
Required to do that.
Yeah.
And really, really phenomenal, that type of effort. And there's been a lot of stories of just gargantuan feats of labor. I know of a mine back in the mountains that Doug McDaniels would talk about, and there was a barrel outside the mouth of the mine that was half full of worn out pick heads. Imagine that for just a moment, like taking a pick and swinging it into rock until it is down to the nubs on both ends, and then filling half of a freaking barrel up with those things.
Yeah. That's a lot of swings. I've done a little pick swinging in my life, but you can imagine how long it would take you to grind a pick down so that you had to toss it in a barrel that you'd used it.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think about.
So that pick head there next to you, I found in in a creek in Hell's Canyon,
Oh, wow.
next to a shallow grave.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and I think that somebody got buried, and whoever did the burying said enough of this and threw their pick down and walked off.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but shallow graves are also the common here because we don't have soil in many places.
No.
So
No.
yeah, you can find graves on a lot of these hilltops, especially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
If you could go back to any single year in Wallowa County and live that year, what year would you pick and why?
Well, I mean, I would definitely want to come through and spend some time here when the Wallowa band was here, and get a chance to meet young Joseph and Ollicott, and for sure. So I would probably pick like a year like 74 or 75. Yeah, there's the T.T. Gear, who's the governor of Oregon around the turn of the century, wrote a book about his coming in from the Grand Round Valley because he was living in Cove as a like 22-year-old on a fishing trip into Wallowa County. And it's funny because it's a great story. He basically writes, there's like 16 of them, and away they come, and he describes the trip and how much fun they had up at the lake catching all the salmon. Got a leaky. They hauled a rowboat over in their wagon, caught all these salmon. Then they bought some old sugar barrels and barrels from the locals and kegged up all their fish. And as they're coming back out, they, of course, there wasn't a road at that clear up the way trail, but they bumped the barrels out of the back of the wagon, scattered all their salmon out across the prairie. But the funny thing about that guy, he's writing that story, and at the exact time that as they're coming in, as with a party of 16 of them on an extended camping trip into the valley, young Joseph and the Nez Perce, the vast majority of the Wallowa band is already down in Wallowa at the confluence of the river, and there's no way to get through there on their camping trip without going right through the middle of that. At the exact same time, because he writes day by day what they're doing, at this precise time that they're moving through Wallowa, according to the military reports, young Joseph is showing up with his gang, and they're describing 2,000 head of horses, 80 lodges, etc. And this guy in his account doesn't mention a native presence one, which is sort of like, what? You're
Really?
leaving out part of the good part of the story, what was going on as you guys were going through and up to the lake. So he strictly keeps it. He doesn't mention the military. He doesn't mention a single native person. He just tells the story of them going up there and hunting and fishing. So if I had just to be along on that trip, even if I could only go back in time for a couple of weeks, I'd want to be along on that trip and see. And then I'd also like to ask him, why didn't you include this other stuff? I think the reason is because he was writing a book for just general readership. He's I think, what's the word I'm looking for? He didn't want to ruffle any feathers. He just wanted to write a story about going on a fishing trip and all these other complications he wasn't going to include in that story. You know what I mean? And they also kind of tell it as if they were out in the wilderness when this area was just wild.
Gotcha.
But what you see is like, there's a whole pile of military in here trying to keep the peace between the settlers and the native folk, and that maybe would have ruined the story, I guess. I don't know.
Huh. Yeah, it is always interesting to look at what's left out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't have that skill as often as I would like. I always admire people who are able to see what's missing, because it asks the right question.
Yeah. But it's one of those things where if you read that account of the governor's account and you don't know, you just read the account and that's the account. But then, you come across another thing like you're like, oh, well, there's a military report from this same time. Oh, and they're describing what's going on. Then you put the two together. You're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Oh, but if I'd stopped there, you would just, you just have a fun fishing trip and you wouldn't know all this other stuff going on. But
Did much change between 1908 and World War II?
I mean, the obvious thing comes to mind, of course, is the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that most of the folks who kind of reflect on that didn't seem all that put out by the Depression.
That's my sense too. Like they're poor, but they had enough to get by.
Yeah.
And they didn't really become more poor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, relatively, of course, there were some hardships because it wasn't as easy living, but relatively speaking, the people here are better able to weather it, I think, than folks, say, in the city or someplace like that.
Yeah.
But
we didn't get that Dust Bowl kind of stuff here.
Yeah.
We're almost always really poor in our rainfall, but we're rich in rivers.
Yeah.
And as long as we get snow in the winter, then you can irrigate in the summer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The verticality of Wallowa County is so interesting because it's often the thing that draws people here because it's beautiful, but what comes with it is often the thing that drives people away or grinds them down into failure.
Yeah. 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 It's a yeah. I mean, my thing is I hope we can keep it from becoming Aspen or, one of these other places. Like to me, it's important that we hold on to our pastures and I don't want a Walmart here. I mean, that stuff, that's why this place is special. And I mean,
almost every business is a local business. We have very few franchises. Our population hasn't changed. Most of our economy is still based on agriculture. And we have lots of tourists that come through, and we have a handful of tourists that try to stay, and some of them make it a few years, some of them make it a few months. But most of them don't make it.
Yeah, which is a good thing.
Couldn't be happier about it.
Which is a good thing. Yeah.
No,
come, but go on home.
No, it's probably wrong of me, but when they eventually break and leave, I love it.
Yeah,
makes me happy every time.
Yeah. It's funny too because I had some neighbors that had moved in from Seattle. They were a nice older couple, but after 3 or 4 winters, they just said, "Nah, nah, we're getting out of here."
Yeah. Well, you're not supposed to live up here in the winter.
Yeah.
You're supposed to go down to the canyons.
Exactly. You're right.
So us idiots that live up here in the wintertime and just hurt and struggle and you can't go anywhere. The highways, roads close all the time. You run out of food.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah.
And there's no skiing, it's just tough.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's saving us.
Yeah.
As long as that can keep saving us, then we're okay.
I think you're right. Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah. Every time they make the road better, I get madder and madder.
Yeah.
I would like them to go back and make it narrower and windier.
Yeah. Let's get some potholes in this thing.
Put it back like rattlesnake. Make it worse. But I'm an old curmudgeon. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. Another interesting thing since we've been talking about the Nez Perce originally being the occupants here, or at least at the time that European settlers came in, and then the government taking that from them. The government has also taken a huge piece of this land from European settlers that followed on, which was, the Snake River corridor.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I think it will probably happen again.
Yeah, and there's lots of folks that them, I know them, who were down there that have really bitter feelings about how that went down, and you can understand why. You go into those places where, Cache Creek and places where people were down there and got booted out of there.
Yeah,
but a lot of that stuff, I think about Nez Perce conceptions of ownership isn't even the right word. Like private, the notions of private property, and then, the system that the Nez Perce had about how land was used. Because like you're saying, anytime you get a bunch of folks together, you're going to have some conflict about who gets what. It reminds me of that old, well, not that old, Leonard Cohen song. What's he say? He says, from the homicidal bitchin' that goes down in every kitchen to determine who will eat and who will serve. So it does come down to that kind of stuff about the division of labor, and not only division of labor, but who gets access to what. And that's all coming from the land, the water, the fish, the papa, all that. So, we always think that the notions of private property have always been 100% around, and then you start investigating the development of concept of private property, from the feudal system to more of a capitalist system in that period in English history, where it was under feudalism, where you had your own chunk of land and you had a contract with the feudal lord, but still those things were passed on from person to person, but they were there were the commons shared by everybody. And up here you look at the Nez Perce, of course they were, it was more complicated than this just being the Wallowa band, because a cayuse, a portion of the cayuse would fish, say, and mine them at that spot. And then just down the river, Umatilla were fishing at that spot. And so it was more about your connection to that specific place.
Yeah.
So, if you could go there and you could say, just like you can do right now in your life, oh yeah, we've been hunting that spot and up in Dobbin Basin. My dad hunted, my grandpa, he got an elk over there one time back in. So you've got this lineage of story that ties you to place. And you've got connection through your relatives. Maybe you marry into that bunch, but just by the fact that the name of the place and the stories that are associated with the place tie you to the use and the ownership, if you will, ownership, air quotes, to that place, which is a different conception than from the folks coming and saying, this is my 160, here are the lines of it. Those two approaches to living with the land, or how you share resources, or how you divvy up resources, are different. They're different.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. My sense of land ownership is a little bit different too. Like, you take the 6 Ranch, for example. I have rights and responsibilities here, but if I don't pay my taxes, then the government takes this land and auctions it off.
Yep.
So I don't really actually own it. I get some rights with, owning it, kind of, but if I don't continue to pay for it every year, then it's not mine anymore.
That's 100% right.
And, that's really no different from those feudal systems that you were talking about. We just kind of exchanged some labels.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. What year would you not want to live in?
Now.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. In Wallowa County, in terms of living in Wallowa County, I mean, I'd give it a go in almost any year, I think. But, there's some moments that weren't too pretty, like the resurgence of the KKK, that was, happening in the 20s.
Did that happen here?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. That was kind of...
Was that a Maxville thing? Like, why did that even happen?
I mean, I think it was, the U.S. had kind of went through the trauma of World War I, and it was this sudden, the U.S. had been kind of minding their own business, if you will, for some time, but got into World War I, and then, I think the big scare really was about Catholic influence, in terms of the Pope will tell Eastern European immigrants, which are, kind of really starting to swarm into the country over that time period, and influence how America is. So they were really worried about that influence. The Pope directing a certain segment of these immigrants that didn't. So you saw this you can see it in the county, a lot of that, from cross burnings and, of course it didn't get as ugly and as it did in, say, Southern Oregon, but still going on pretty,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Another thing we talked about yesterday is how local history does not get taught in schools.
Yeah.
And what a shame that is.
Yeah.
And I get it. It's kind of, you've got to educate the children of the nation, and there needs to be a fairly consistent method to do that. I do understand that, but what a shame that we don't talk through, the greatness of what we were and the ugliness of what we were, and to understand all that. I think it's so important to really dig into history, to learn it, and learn mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so grateful for this conversation and for your
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah. And I mean, I know I was talking to some Whitman college students, and also, gosh, he was there. There was several native folk and some other professor types, and they had just asked me to talk about Wallowa County, and so I'm talking to these students primarily, and all I did was just showing them some pictures, and then just pulling out some quotes, say, and I could see that the students were frustrated with me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wasn't sort of synthesizing anything. I wasn't saying, here's how it was. I was just saying, and you know how history is, you could cherry pick anything you want,
Sure.
right? I was just taking out sort of representative things on topics that I was interested, like we've been talking about, mostly native settler relations and attitudes and beliefs or regarding nature on both sides, and just presenting that to the class, these college students. And at the end of it, they're just like, frustrated, like, what? Well, you got to tell us what. And I was struck by that. I was like, oh, right, okay. So they wanted me to come in and tell them, here's how it was. Here's how it was. And I resist that. I don't really want to do that. I just want to say, there's a lot out there. It's like if you go to the ocean, there's a lot out there. And so to find out about it, you got to do a further study. These are just kind of teasers. I'm not here to tell you how it was. I'm just here to give you some things to think about. And the older folks afterwards they came up and said, oh, I was kind of apologize for the students. I was like, no, it's fine. But they weren't. They found that approach perfect in their mind, that they were just like, it piqued their curiosity and they wanted to know more about that, where the students just wanted me to wrap it up in a neat package and say, here's how it was, and then they could go along the way with a bit of certainty. And I don't think if you study history at any depth, I don't think it really gives you that. I think there's more. It only makes it more complicated, more nuanced, it resists that sort of overarching statement that is going to wrap it up in a nice package, I think.
I think that's just a symptom of the idealism that comes with students of a younger age.
Yeah.
Like that's where our brains are at.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're used to and what we expect.
Yeah.
And then you get led through a long series of crushing disappointments and realize that it's not like that at all.
No, and I mean, I get it. I mean, you could be frustrated. Just, hey, give me the synopsis, and then I'll move on. I get that, but I think that history should be about teaching you how to think. To think about thinking, and not, like, here's the 3 main causes of the Civil War. Bye bye.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that's so surface level that
Right.
You're not getting a whole lot out of that.
So let's put a bow on it like this. If somebody has a question like you did, how should they go about starting to answer that question through studying history? How did you do it? How would you do it differently if you started with a basic question like that, something that you wonder about within your own local history or maybe someplace else? Somebody wants to research this on their own, how do they do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think The hard part is finding the sources. What are the sources? Where are they? How do you get these things? Now that we live in a time where a lot of this stuff is a lot easier since a lot of it's online and you can research, makes research a lot easier, whether you're hitting up ancestry.com or you're looking at the land homestead filings on, BLM site, or a lot more newspapers have been thrown on that are searchable now. So it's a lot easier, say, now than it was for a historian 20 years ago to try to dive in this. But knowing where these old newspapers are located and these historical accounts, because they're just scattered. I mean, and so that's probably the hardest part, is trying to dive into where the source is. And, for me, it could be anything from like, okay, I want to look at the financial conditions of the folks coming in. So that's making a trip over to Union County to dig through the earliest tax rolls they have are from 73. So, okay, I can look and see who's in Wallowa County in 73 and what they got, because they're listing how many horses you got, how many sheep you got, how many pigs you got, how much money you got in your pocket, how much the value of your land is worth, how your household implements and tools, they're laying it out there. So you can look at that sort of information in terms of economics, or you can start diving into the old newspapers. And on our work at the History Center with the Wallowa History Center is ongoing to try to make that stuff more available to people so they can access it. So if you go on our website, you can pull up links to a lot of the newspapers we've digitized, and you can read them. So we work with University of Oregon just recently to get all of the oldest chieftains up till 1899 digitized. And we finally got that done. So if you go on that site, you can pull up, say, those remaining chieftains in that time period, the earliest ones, and you can read them page by page. It's right there.
Can you word search them as well?
Yes, you can, and which makes it great. Like if you want to throw in, like me, I'm going to throw in coyote in there because I want to know something about the war on coyote.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I'm interested in that. So I want to know about trapping coyotes. I want to know, all of that. So I'm looking on there, and it'll bring up those hits. It's not perfect because a lot of those papers are printed a little rough. Mm-hmm. So it may miss a word or two occasionally, but generally it does a pretty good job.
Yeah.
And so if you're into a certain subject, whether it's deer, elk, like, I'm interested in those things, you can keyword search. And we've got a whole bunch of, because, the Chieftain wasn't the only paper. There's a Lostine Leader and lots of other paper, Enterprise Border Signal that we've digitized on there. And then also, of course, like the Horner papers, which now you can digitally search. And so a lot of that stuff we continue to put on our website so that people can hit those up and find out more information.
And what's that website again?
It's just wallowahistorycenter.org.
Okay.
And then if you go to the Research Tools tab, it'll bring up some of that stuff, and you can pull those up. And
yeah. And folks, if you're panicking about how to spell the word Wallowa, don't worry about it, because if you go to the podcast description, there's going to be a link in there that you can click, and it'll take you straight to that website. And you can research this county, or you can go do some research on where you come from, if you're not from here.
Yeah.
David, incredible. Your memory, so sharp.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, this is awesome. I learned so much today.
Me too.
I learned so much today. And I'm going to be developing questions of my own, and now I've got a place to go to look them up. I kind of want to go punch in whitetail and see if anything comes up in the early newspapers.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh yeah, dogs. What was going on with the dogs?
Right.
Yeah. Or Appaloosas. Mm-hmm. There's a ton there that I'd be really curious about finding out more.
Yeah. I need to run that Appaloosa thing down a little bit more. There's a documentary about it, about tracking the Appies between Mongolia and here, and I've got some questions.
Does Dennis? What's he know about that? Dennis Sheehy.
So I had Dennis on the show. I need to get him back. He got all spun up talking about the wild Asiatic ass. I think he has a good time saying that. But no, I didn't ask Dennis about the Appaloosas. I need to,
Yeah.
Yeah, he would be definitely one that should know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing you mentioned too is like, yeah, what kind of cattle exactly were what did Nez
Mm-hmm.
Perce run, and then early on here, what kind of cattle was the preferred?
Yeah.
You know?
They had to have been tough. And that was the thing about the Herefords is all the fat is on the outside of their carcass, so they could handle the winter. They could eat crappy feed.
Yeah.
They didn't make a very good piece of meat, but they could survive, which is
Yeah.
foremost. But I think that it was probably Corrientes that the Nez Perce were running, and that would have been a good breed if you're having to trail cattle to Kansas.
Yeah.
They could handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. Tough cows. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good. I didn't know if they just had like a mixed bag of stuff.
Yeah.
Or what was going on there?
They weren't Angus.
No, they weren't Angus. They're not Angus. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've both got questions. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, it's always one question's going to lead to another question. Yeah, for
Cool.
sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thank you all very much for listening. I'm going to keep bringing you these stories from normal people just like you who have done extraordinary things. Everyone is an expert at something, and they have interesting perspectives on life and work and the environment and all of the things that we care about. I'm going to keep bringing that to you. And I want to thank you so much for making this show possible. I also want to thank Emily Bratcher for producing this show. She does a great job editing. Really appreciate her. I want to thank John Chatelain. He did the art for the Six Ranch podcast. And Celia, soon to be Harlander, she digitized that so that we can get it out there on the internet for you. Also want to thank Justin Hay for writing this original music and the beautiful whistling that you're listening to right now. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Please keep listening to the show. Write me a review if you feel like it, and just keep doing your thing, and we'll all learn from this together. It's been fun, and we're just getting started.